All right, how about some individual picks that I really loved? Buffalo. How about Buffalo jumping up to get Dalton Kincaid? And I love the way, if you were watching the NFL Network coverage, I love what Daniel said right before Buffalo selected. He said, if the rest of the league is going to sit here and let Buffalo take Dalton Kincaid, then shame on them and they get exactly what they deserve. And lo and behold, here's Dalton Kincaid to the Buffalo Bills. They trade up, select him, and this is a outstanding player, widely considered the best tight end in the draft. Now, I thought Mara was also very good, but Kincaid is just a little bit more of a flex tight end. It's not that he's going to sit down there and get in line and be a great blocker. I mean, he can, but he's not going to be great. But what he is great at is being a threat in space, the flex tight end position, the move tight end position. And if you're going to give Josh Allen a red zone threat in particular, because remember, some of those mistakes that Allen made this last year, they wound up being big mistakes in the red zone. What do you need in the red zone? I've always said this. In the red zone, the tight end can be a quarterback's best friend. Well, there you go with Kincaid, who will be a matchup nightmare for opposing defenses, and they get him at 25. Love the pick. Buffalo is going to be a better team because of this, and I think Kincaid is going to have a great career. Another pick that I absolutely loved, and one of it is that I just love him, and then the other part is just the scene that unfolded when this pick was made. Check it out.
Hey, it's going good. This is Dad. My phone wasn't working. Look here, man. You want to come to work with me next week?
I wouldn't mind that.
I got somebody want to speak to you. I got somebody want to speak to you.
I don't know when I've been speaking for everybody that's really in the heart of the Dallas Cowboys is standing here with a tear in our eye. We're
Yes,
so
sir.
happy to have you on the Dallas Cowboys.
I can't thank you enough.
Well, what I really want to say, you earned every ounce of me being able to make this call.
That is so awesome. That is so awesome. And he's been one of my favorite players. I love Deuce Vaughn. Love Deuce Vaughn. And that whole scene, I was thinking more and more about that after it happened. And listen, my dad was a football coach. I spent so much time with my dad. Some of the most, I'm going to get choked up. Oh, geez. This is so, you turn into a dad and you become a little bit of a crier. I spent so many hours with my dad around his football team. So you can imagine the relationship that Deuce and his father have around the sport and how many dinners that they've shared. Deuce talking about his dreams and his dad talking about what it would take to reach those lofty dreams. And then to be able to share that, I can remember my whole life, all I wanted to do was play high school football for my father. And then when I got to do it, I loved it. I loved every moment of it. Some of the most joyful moments of my entire life. I remember getting to hug him after big wins. So to have that moment between a father and a son, and again, as I get older with 3 sons, I just get sentimental. To have that moment, can you imagine, those of you out there that are fathers, can you imagine getting to call your son and getting to share the news that the dream of his life just happened, just came true, just got drafted into the National Football League? Again, I didn't think I was going to get all like mushy about this one, but I love it. Now, outside of just the moment, I do think Deuce has a chance to be a really good NFL player. People knock Deuce's speed. And you know what? Fair enough. Because, yes, on the stopwatch, if you're just going to sit there and click the stopwatch, is he the fastest player you've ever seen? No. Here's what I would say, though. Great. So go tackle him. Because isn't that the name of the game? See, the last time I checked, we're not giving points away just because you're fast on a stopwatch. You earn points and first downs because you can avoid tackles. You can break tackles. You understand the game. And this guy does all of those things. See, I actually think it's a great pick. It's not just sentimental. as mushy as I can sit here and get and think about that moment between a father and a son, the reality of it is I think Deuce is going to help the Cowboys. You give him the ball between 6, 7, 8 times a game, good things are going to happen. He can create first downs for you. He is elusive. Like I said, fine. Click the stopwatch all you want. Tell me that he's not fast enough. Somebody go tackle him. See how it works out. See how it works out. Because generally speaking, there's a lot of defenders that are tackling nothing and they're just rolling around with a big handful of air when they're trying to tackle Deuce Vaughn. So Deuce, good luck. I know this sounds stupid, but proud of you. You had a chance to leave Kansas State for a lot of money. You chose to stay there. You left a great legacy there in Manhattan, Kansas, and now here you go, and you get to go try to make the Dallas Cowboys, and I hope that you do. All right, let's move on now to quarterbacks. 14 quarterbacks taken in this year's draft, and that's not necessarily news. That's not anything to write home about, but 12 of those quarterbacks were actually taken in the first 5 rounds. That's pretty extraordinary. That's a record. 12 quarterbacks taken in the first 5 rounds. Speaks to a lot of different things. Let me mention a couple of factors. Number one is that we have a lot of experienced quarterbacks now in college football. A couple of things happened. 1, NIL, 2, COVID year. So we've got a bunch of experienced quarterbacks, and there was actually a lot of decent grades for these guys. And what you'll see is that these organizations see value in getting these guys that they feel like can be competent backups that are cheap. What do you need if you're paying your quarterback $250 million? A cheap backup. And that's what all of these great teams are going to be doing in the next few years. Allen's up there in salary. Jalen Hurts is up there in salary now. Lamar Jackson just signed a huge deal. Joe Burrow is about to break the bank, and he's going to be the highest paid player in the NFL. So you need these guys in there, and why not have somebody that's played a lot of football so the experienced guys, they had a little bit more value than maybe you see when guys come out early. So I think that had something to do with it. Now, let's talk about one quarterback specifically. And we've all talked about Stroud and Young and all these guys up at the top, and even Hendon Hooker, who got selected, or even Anthony Richardson. I want to talk about Will Levis, because Will Levis became the story of the draft, in particular on night 1 and then into night 2. Sitting there and doing the draft and watching the draft unfold, I had a pit in my stomach for Will Levis. And that pit in my stomach wasn't like, oh my gosh, he's slipping. It's, I can't believe that they're allowing this, because it was totally avoidable. It was totally avoidable. Will Levis is a really good player, but there's a reason why I had Will Levis not in my top 10 players available, but in my top, 35 players available, which, by the way, is really good. And everyone thought, I got a lot of blowback on social media when I would say things like, hey, I have concerns about Will Levis. And they'd be like, oh, you're a hater, blah, 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 blah. Why do you hate Will Levis? One, I don't hate Will Levis. He was a quarterback that I thought a lot of. He was in my top 35 overall players in the entire draft, which is, by the way, about right where he got selected. But I will tell you that I'm not part of the draft machine. I'm part of college football. And so I feel like I had a much more realistic view of what Will Levis was and is than some of these draft people. The moment I saw Will Levis's name pop up, and you know exactly where we all saw it pop up, on lists last summer talking about the best quarterback prospects of the season, I was like, whoa, that's a little high. And then I started hearing things like, well, don't watch 2022, watch 2021. What are you talking about? They were basically the same tape. He threw 13 interceptions in 2021, only 10 in 2022. He turned the ball over too much. He was inaccurate at times. There was tremendous, and there is tremendous upside with him, but those of us that are in college football kind of saw this coming. Will Levis was a victim of the draft machine. He was. He was a victim of the draft machine and the hype surrounding it. I don't think, unfortunately, he was there and this happened to him. And you know what? Maybe if the Colts just view it a little bit differently, he's selected there at number 4, and then it's Anthony Richardson that starts to fall. And does Richardson fall into the second round if he's not selected at 4? Probably not. Why? Because the upside is too high. But as soon as Levis wasn't selected by the Colts, I turned to Charles Davis and Daniel Jeremiah, and we all looked at each other, and we were like, this could be a long night for him, because there was nowhere to put him. Maybe Tennessee, maybe, but they didn't have to at that point. Why? Because they knew they could get him later. So, listen, I wish Will Levis all the success in the world, and I felt sick to my stomach for him and his family and the entire scene. And by the way, this whole, probability of getting drafted, totally made up. Based on what? Sorry, I digress. Will was a victim of the draft machine. If you are in college football like we are, and if you're a fan of this show, I say we because we are a part of college football. If you've been a part of college football and really taking in over the last few years, you were surprised with this quote-unquote draft evaluation. And like I was. Like I said, love the kid. High upside, great arm, great kid, good leader, good with his teammates. All of those things are tremendous assets. The problem is, he was my number 33rd ranked prospect. I don't think that your 33rd ranked prospect should be sitting in the green room in the draft. So, Will, I hope that you go out and have a lot of success. And if I might take a moment, I would say just directly to Will Levis, here's my words of advice. If you are hurt by this, good. Let it burn deep down in your soul every day. Let it drive you. Let it be your motivation. Because guess what? Nobody cares on that team and in that locker room that you're about to walk in. Nobody cares where you were drafted. Nobody cares what your experience was or if it was embarrassing. They're not going to be there to coddle you. The currency in that locker room is going to be one thing and one thing only. Can you help us win football games? So go to work. Let it drive you. Let it be your fuel. All right? We can sit here and say, we feel sorry. It's a starting line. So use it as motivation. And if I asked you 7 years ago, before you had ever even gone to Penn State, hey, you're going to get selected in the second round of the NFL draft in 2023, you would have said, take it. Take it and run. Take the opportunity and run. So do it. Let this, what you're feeling right now, that you thought you were underrated. What happened? Let it burn deep down inside of you and use it for motivation and go out and prove everybody wrong. All right, let's move into college football now. I just had to say that because you know what? I just saw everyone was like, yeah, hey, let's go. Anyways, let's move to college football now because everybody always likes to evaluate conferences. And yes, for the 17th straight year, the SEC had the most draft picks in the NFL draft. By the way, we all would have bet a lot of money on that because we all know that was the case. And this is the reason why the SEC has been the best conference in college football in the last decade, 2 decades, right? We all know that. Now, what I did find interesting, though, is that the first round was fairly balanced for the first time in a while, right? I mean, for the first time in at least, 7 years? It wasn't just the SEC that had the most picks in the first round. So there was some balance through this thing. Like the Big 12 has not had great drafts recently, and here they are with 6 picks in the first round. The Big 10 had 9 picks. The SEC had 9 picks. The Big 12 had 6 picks, ACC 4, and the Pac-12 3. So it was fairly well distributed. No group of 5 players, by the way, so no Sauce Gardners out there. But it was a fairly good representation of college football, and I thought that was a good thing. I'm hoping that this is more the norm moving forward than an anomaly. Now, is that the case? I'm not sure because I just saw the recruiting rankings and basically, every 5-star player basically went to the SEC. So we'll see how that goes. But I do think that as the playoff expands and as we can define more teams and programs as successful, maybe we'll start to see this distribution more times than not. Now, as far as teams go, you're sitting there and you're like, well, who are the 2 teams that are most represented in the NFL draft? Not hard to find that. It's Georgia and Alabama. They each have 10 players. I think the next 2 would be a little surprising because most people would automatically think, as I did, like Ohio State was probably number 2. It wasn't. It was Michigan with 9 players selected. And then the 4th team that is most represented in the draft is actually really surprising, and it was TCU. And now you know exactly why they had such a great year. It's because they had great players. Remember, it's not necessarily, although a little bit, but necessarily about the X's and O's. It's about the Jimmies and the Joes. And this is a representation of that. Only Ohio State is the team that's not on this list of the top 4 teams represented in the NFL draft that went to the playoff. So there you go. I do think it's fascinating, by the way. If you look at the 2021 Georgia defense, 2021 Georgia defense, now off of that defense, there have been 14 players selected. I just said defense, by the way. The 2021 Georgia defense has had 14 players selected in the NFL draft, 7 of them in the first round. That is insane. Insane. What has gone on in the last 2 years at Georgia is so unprecedented. I can't tell you how impressive this is of what Kirby Smart has built. And then just a quick side note. So that was maybe and will go down as one of the greatest defenses of all time, right? We start looking back at like the 01 Miami Hurricanes or who was on the field in the 05 National Championship as far as number of draft picks on that USC and Texas team. Well, we're going to go back to like the 2021-2022 Georgia team that won back-to-back national championships, and we're going to start talking about all the draft picks on that team in coming years. And we're going to sit there and we're going to be like, hold on. The 2021 Georgia defense had 7 first-round draft picks, and then you have to think in the back of your head, remember this? That team got run out of the building by Bryce Young. People forget that. Bama won the SEC championship and ran that Georgia team out of the building with Jamison Williams. They threw it all over that Georgia team. And by the way, if Williams doesn't tear up his knee, who knows what happens in the national championship game? Just like wild. And I can't wait for another 4 or 5 years to start to put that into perspective of what we saw over the last couple of years in college football.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoy that clip, make sure you click subscribe somewhere down here. From game highlights to exclusive interviews and rankings, we've got everything you need as a college football fan right here, College Football on Fox.